The date was November 21st, 1916, at approximately 8:11 a.m., and just off the coast of the Greek island of Kea, a nearly 900-foot ship is making her way through the channel. This massive boat was His Majesty's hospital ship Britannic, the world's largest floating hospital. At this point in time, Europe was caught in the crossfire of the Great War, and the Britannic, originally built as an ocean liner, was requisitioned by the Royal Navy and converted into a hospital ship to help with wounded Allied soldiers. Loaded with a little over 1,000 crew members and nurses, the Britannic was just about to complete one of her many voyages to the Greek Island of Lemnos to pick up wounded and sick soldiers and bring them back to England. But unbeknownst to everyone on board the magnificent steamer, the Britannic would never make it to Lemnos. Hello everyone, this is Camden McDonald, and this is the sinking of the H.M.H.S. Britannic on episode 3 of Rewinding History. This video was sponsored by Carol Lynn Watts Christian School Marching Band. Keep on watching to find out how you can sign up today. The RMS Britannic, constructed by Harland and Wolff in Belfast, Northern Ireland, was launched on February 26, 1914. Owned by the White Star Line, she was the third and final ship of the Olympic class, consisting of her sisters RMS Olympic and RMS Titanic. The Britannic reached a length of 882 feet 9 inches, a beam of 94 feet, a height of 175 feet, and weighed a total gross tonnage of 48,158. The ship went through numerous design changes after the Titanic sank on her maiden voyage in April 1912. Among them were the installation of 55 total lifeboats, accommodating a capacity of around 3,600 people, more than enough for her expected passenger capacity of 3,309. To help with all these extra lifeboats, the Britannic was to be fitted with 8 enormous electric gantry cranes. They could launch boats faster than their predecessor and launch them in more dangerous conditions. However, during her fitting out process, World War I, also known as the Great War, broke out in Europe, and her construction slowed greatly. However, after the Gallipoli campaign ended in a disaster for the Allied nations and leaving thousands of wounded soldiers in Turkey, the Royal Navy approached the White Star Line and requisitioned the Britannic as a hospital ship. Now known as His Majesty's hospital ship Britannic, she was repainted white with a green stripe wrapping around her hull, broken up by 3 large red crosses, with the final touch being her bright yellow funnels. Due to the Royal Navy needing the ship ASAP, only 5 of her planned 8 gantry cranes were installed. To help with the now excess of lifeboats, many regular davits were installed next to the gantry cranes. The H.M.H.S. Britannic made her maiden voyage in December 1915, traveling from Southampton, England to Mudros on the Greek island of Lemnos, with a quick fuel stop at Naples, Italy. She successfully picked up her first round of thousands of the wounded and brought them back to England. The Britannic would complete 2 more voyages from Southampton to Lemnos throughout the 1915 season and into the 1916 season. In June 1916, with the Gallipoli campaign ended and no more wounded needing transport, the Britannic was returned to the White Star Line and sent back to Belfast to be converted back into an ocean liner. However, with an outbreak of malaria in the Balkans, a new war front in northern Africa, and only 1 hospital ship serving the Mediterranean, only 2 months into her fitting out, the Royal Navy once again requisitioned the Britannic as a hospital ship. The H.M.H.S. Britannic would once again continue her Southampton to Mudros route, completing 2 voyages nearing the completion of the 1916 season. On November 12, 1916, at 2:23 p.m., the H.M.H.S. Britannic left Southampton bound yet again for Mudros Lemnos on her 6th voyage. On board were 673 crew members, 77 nurses, 315 Royal Army Medical Corps personnel, and the captain, Charles Bartlett. He was given the nickname Iceberg Charlie for his rumored ability to smell ice well before it is seen. The Britannic made it to her usual fuel stop at Naples on November 17th. She was scheduled to leave later that evening, but a large thunderstorm engulfed the area, keeping the ship in port. On November 19th, Captain Bartlett saw a break in the weather and took the opportunity to leave Naples and continue en route towards Mudros. It's now the early morning of Tuesday, November 21st, 1916, at approximately 8:10 a.m. The Britannic is currently sailing through the Kea Channel, scheduled to arrive at Mudros later that day. On board the ship, things are going well. No choppy seas rocking the boat around, breakfast was being served, and the nurses and crew were getting prepared to soon take on the massive load of wounded and sick patients. However, just a few hundred yards in front of the ocean liner, an underwater explosive is lying idle. This was an underwater contact German mine, laid only a few days prior by a German U-boat. This was just one in a long line of mines laid across the channel, all aimed at sinking any British warship that came into the area. No one on board knew that the Britannic was steaming full speed towards this underwater explosive, and at 8:12 a.m., contact was made. Man, that truly sucks for the Britannic, but you know what doesn't suck? Today's sponsor, Carolyn Watts Christian School Marching Band. Well, technically it's not really a sponsorship, more so a promotion. Either way, I'm sticking with YouTube tradition. Carolyn Watts Christian School Marching Band is a school started up by my big brother, Chance Jace McDonald. The school is named after our late grandmother, Carolyn Watts Wheeler, who was a hardcore Christian who loved spreading the word of Jesus Christ. Mr. McDonald is looking for young, enthusiastic band kids like you, 5th grade to 12th grade. Classes are after school hours, Tuesdays and Thursdays. Fridays are open to anyone who hasn't touched an instrument and would like to learn. Brass, percussion, woodlands, piano, you name it. Drum major and color guard are also available on Tuesdays and Thursdays. If you are interested, go to www.clwcs.org or scan the QR code on screen right now to find classes right for you and sign up today. If you have any questions, call 951-746-7171. Thank you. The immediate explosion created a massive hole that opened 2 of Britannic's 17 watertight compartments to the sea. The ship was built so that if 6 compartments were flooded, she would still stay afloat, so this damage alone would not sink the ship. But the force of the explosion warped the Britannic's hull a bit, damaging 2 of Britannic's forward bulkheads, opening up 2 more compartments at the ship's bow. The ship, however, could still remain afloat with this damage. But within the damaged compartments stood a hallway called the Fireman's Tunnel, which connected the forward compartments with Boiler Room 6, now meaning 5 compartments were flooding. Even still, the ship could not sink with all these factors at play. Unfortunately though, due to the ship's hull warping from the explosion, the watertight door in between Boiler Rooms 6 and 5 jammed in the fully open position. Now with a grand total of 6 compartments flooding, the Britannic was now holding on by a thread, but still had a chance at remaining afloat, just as long as no outside factors were at play. Sadly, this wasn't the case. Just before the ship struck the mine, many of the staff had gone into the bowels of the ship and opened up a good number of her bow portholes to allow fresh air to begin circulating throughout the ship. Not only was it against wartime regulations for the Britannic to do so, but with these open portholes and the 6 breech compartments, the ship's bow was to dip down so far that these portholes were to become submerged, allowing more water to rapidly gush into the ship. The fate of the H.M.H.S. Britannic is now sealed. She was going to sink. Within moments of the explosion, Captain Bartlett arrived on the bridge. Still wearing his pajamas, he immediately issued 3 orders. Shut the watertight doors, though he was unaware of the broken one in Boiler Room 5. Inform Britannic's wireless operator to send out an SOS message, and swing out all the lifeboats and get them ready for loading. The ship's emergency quarters alarm rang out and the evacuation signal sounded from the ship's horn, which is 4 long blasts. 8:20 a.m., 8 minutes after the mine explosion. The Britannic's bow was already deep in the water, letting in more water via her open portholes. She also gained a small list to starboard. Meanwhile, Britannic's wireless operator is getting very anxious as he is not hearing any replies from anyone. When the ship struck the mine, her hull flexed, which snapped the Marconi cable strung between the ocean liner's 2 masts. This wire was meant for receiving transmissions from other operators. This meant that the Britannic was still able to send out her SOS message, but she wasn't able to hear any replies. While the operator wasn't able to hear anyone around him, the wireless operators aboard the H.M.S. Scourge and H.M.S. Heroic were quick to receive her SOS and immediately set out to her coordinates. The crew quickly prepared all of Britannic's lifeboats, but Captain Bartlett ordered them not to lower them just yet, because he had a plan to try and save his massive steamer. The Greek island of Kea stood around 3 miles off of Britannic's starboard. Bartlett was going to try and turn the ship towards the island, order her engines full ahead, and beach the ocean liner up on the island's beach, thus saving the ship from a deep watery grave. One little caveat in his plan, however, was the connection between the helm and the rudder was severed in the explosion. With no rudder to turn the ship, Bartlett got clever and signaled for Britannic's engines to run the middle and port propeller at full speed. This would cause the ship to slowly turn towards the island without needing the rudder. Britannic's engines fired up again, and her middle and port props, now sticking out of the water, began churning the sea around them into a white foam as they began the slow process of pushing the ship towards the island. At this time, a group of panicked firemen had just emerged from the ship's boiler rooms, and they rushed Britannic's aft portside lifeboat and launched it against the captain's orders. Assistant Commander Harry Dyke saw this boat gently touch down on the ocean surface. Instead of cursing them out for launching the boat, he ordered they pick up any survivors who jumped overboard so many of the empty seats in the boat wouldn't go to waste. Meanwhile, many of Britannic's crew, who had prepared all the lifeboats but ordered by Bartlett to not lower them yet, were getting increasingly worried as they were noticing the ship's increasing downward tilt and starboard list. Their minds were possibly swirling with thoughts of the recent sinkings of the RMS Lusitania of the Cunard Line and White Star Line's own RMS Titanic. Without consulting their captain, the crew went ahead and began launching two of Britannic's forward portside lifeboats. At 8:29 a.m., the first of these boats, loaded with approximately 20 crew and nurses, touched down on the water surface. As soon as the falls were cut, however, the boat started drifting aft as the Britannic's forward motion sucked the lifeboat into its wake, dragging it across its hull. As the lifeboat drifts further aft, everyone on board suddenly freezes as they see what's in their path. Britannic's humongous bronze port propeller, sticking up out of the water and spinning rapidly. Many in the boat stared at the massive propeller, paralyzed with fear, while others took their chances and jumped into the ocean as the boat was dragged into the spinning blades. The boat, along with many of its occupants, were chopped to pieces by the propeller. Not too long after, at around 8:33, Britannic's 5th Officer Gordon Fielding began swinging out one of the boats with the ship's aft port gantry crane. As he swung it out, it was suddenly rushed by a group of panicking stewardesses and sailors. Fielding kept his cool and convinced the sailors to get out and return to their stations, while keeping some of the stewardesses in the boat to prevent them from getting in the way of the impending evacuation. Fielding then began to lower this boat, but upon seeing the engines were still on, he stopped the lowering when the boat was around 10 feet above the waterline. The people in the boat began shouting to him, demanding that he'd continue the lowering, but Fielding did not budge. At that same time, however, a second lifeboat on the forward port side was also launched against the captain's orders. On board this boat was a stewardess named Violet Jessup. She has had a very interesting history with the Olympic class, as in September 1911 she had been on board the RMS Olympic when she collided with the British war steamer H.M.H.S. Hawke, and in April 1912 she was aboard the RMS Titanic during her maiden voyage and survived her sinking. As soon as this lifeboat touched the water and its falls were cut, just like the lifeboat before it, this boat would also get sucked into the Britannic's wake as it too began drifting aft along the ship's hull. Around 30 seconds after the boat was launched, Jessup watched as everyone in her boat began leaping into the water. It didn't take her long to find out why, as looking at what was in the boat's path, her blood ran cold. There was the ship's port side propeller, still spinning rapidly. Without wasting any time, despite the fact she couldn't swim, she too jumped into the ocean as this boat also got sucked straight into the rotating blades. Jessup was extremely lucky to have survived. Despite receiving a small concussion from her head banging into the broken lifeboat's keel, she was later picked up by another lifeboat without further injuries. Meanwhile, a third boat was launched from the forward port side, and it too began dragging against Britannic's hull, caught in the ship's powerful wake. Thankfully, however, at 8:35, just 20 or so seconds after the second boat got chopped up, Captain Bartlett, who had no idea of the two boats getting chopped up by the props, ordered the engine stopped as he figured that it was already too late to try and beach Britannic. At that time, this third boat began sailing straight towards the port propeller, but thankfully, as the boat quickly approached, the massive blades slowed to a stop. The people in the boat were able to push the boat away from the props as they drifted away from the massive liner. As he gave the orders to stop the engines, Bartlett finally gave the green light for his crew to begin loading and launching Britannic's many lifeboats. The ship's gantry cranes began picking up and launching their stacked pile of lifeboats. One of the aft port cranes then suddenly jams, rendering it useless. However, this did not delay the evacuation as the other 4 cranes and starboard davits continued launching their many lifeboats without trouble. Many of these boats helped picked up wounded from the water who had barely survived on their boats that were destroyed by the Britannic's propeller. At 8:50 a.m., 38 minutes after Britannic struck the mine, and 35 lifeboats have gotten away from the ship. The Britannic's forward tilt has increased greatly, with her forecastle now just a few feet from the ocean's surface. By this time, the Britannic's starboard list reached 10 degrees, making launching boats from the gantry cranes on the port side no longer possible. The crew on that side began tossing deck chairs and life rafts overboard and into the ocean. Captain Bartlett, still on board overseeing the ship's evacuation, noticed that the ship's rate of sinking seemed to slow down, giving him false hope that his plan to beach the ship still could be executed. He ordered the launching of boats to be halted and once again ordered for the engines to fire up the middle and port props in a second attempt to reach Kea. However, with the props now half out of the water and with the ship's increasing forward tilt, Bartlett was unknowingly increasing the ship's rate of sinking. By 9 a.m., Britannic's forecastle and well deck were almost completely submerged. Captain Bartlett, now getting word that D-deck was flooding, finally acknowledged that it was now impossible to save his ship. Now, with the ship having overshot Kea, he ordered the engines to stop for the final time and relieved his crew of their duties. With the ship's remaining steam, Bartlett sounded 2 long blasts from the ship's horn, which is the signal for abandoned ship. Britannic's bridge was now beginning to sink closer to the ocean's level. On the ship's starboard bridge wing, Captain Bartlett, Chief Officer Dyke, and Chief Engineer Robert Felming stood, watching as the great steamer started to roll heavier onto her side and the bow dipping deeper into the ocean. Now among the last people aboard, Dyke and Felming, later followed by Bartlett, walked off into the ocean as the ship's final plunge began. The engineering crew, including Assistant Chief Engineer Joseph Wolfe, just emerged from the bowels of the ship, emerging on the sea deck second-class quarters. The ship's first funnel was now touching the water, and Wolfe and his crew leaped 80 feet into the sea as the stern began to rise out of the water. They were later picked up by lifeboats. With the ship now lying on her side, the list was too much for the ship's bright yellow funnels. One by one, their bracing wires snapped and they gracefully fell into the ocean. As the nearly 900-foot ship sank mere miles off Kea, the ship's bow struck the 400-foot sea floor while the stern was still above the waterline. At 9:07 a.m., 55 minutes after striking the mine, the pride ship of both the White Star Line and the Royale Navy slipped beneath the waves. The survivors in the lifeboats began picking up people from the water as they awaited rescue. The H.M.S. Heroic was the first ship to arrive on scene. She would be closely followed by the H.M.S. Scourge and some local fishing boats from Kea. Over the next hour and a half, almost every survivor was picked up and accounted for. Many had actually made it to the city of Carissia on Kea, where many of the surviving nurses tended to the wounded. They would later be picked up by the HMS Foxhound, which later joined the Heroic and Scourge and steamed together to the city of Piraeus on mainland Greece. Of the 1,066 people on board, 30 perished in the sinking, with 1,036 surviving. The reason for the high survival rate was the warmer water temps, more lifeboats, an orderly evacuation, and help arriving as soon as it did. After a week-long investigation into the sinking, with the press thinking this was the result of a German U-boat firing a torpedo at the oceanliner, the investigators were quick to discover that it was more likely a mine, which was later officially confirmed as the cause. Despite this, the press was quick to spread anti-German messages about the sinking of the hospital ship. The H.M.H.S. Britannic was the largest ship lost in World War I, and to this day remains the largest passenger shipwreck on the ocean floor. Her wreck went undiscovered until December 3, 1975, when oceanographer Jacques Cousteau discovered her resting 400 feet under the waters of the Kea Channel and only 3 miles away from the very island she tried to beach herself upon. Today, she rests as a wartime grave to the 30 people who died during her sinking.